I learned early on that there is a brutal difference between faith and certainty. Faith is a bridge over the abyss. Certainty is the abyss disguised as ground. When the war began, or when it ceased to be just a sum of ancient hatreds and turned into a calendar of massacres, I still believed that God would allow a limit. I told myself this as one repeats a psalm to hold on to their own mind. There is a limit. There is a point at which heaven intervenes. There is a cut in history, but history doesn't cut. It grinds. The maps were redrawn by fronts, not borders. The names of cities became tactical codes. Hunger became method. Water, currency. In Jerusalem, always Jerusalem ceased to be a place and became an open wound in the world. A symbol that each side swore to protect while it was destroyed little by little each day. I was a military chaplain before everything turned ruin. I was trained to hold men who trembled inside and to bury young men who still had dirt under their nails from digging trenches. I carried a small Bible, already without a cover, and a conviction too big to fit in my chest. I prayed for those who called me brother and for those who called me enemy. Because deep down, the war had shown me the same thing over and over. Pain has no language. Pain only has a body. Then came the signs. First, a glow in the sky, an aurora. In latitudes that had never known aurora. Then, fine, metallic rains that left a copper taste in the mouth. Finally, a night when the stars seemed to change places, as if someone had pushed the firmament with the palm of their hand. Both sides interpreted that as confirmation. I heard impassioned sermons, saw clandestine broadcasts, read pamphlets dropped by drones. For some, it was the herald of the end. For others, the proof that the enemy had been cursed. For me, it was just the sky behaving in a way the sky had never behaved before. And as much as I hated myself for it, a part of me was afraid. Not the fear of God, but the fear of having misunderstood everything. The escalation was swift, as it always is when humanity finds a new reason to die. On the day we marched to Jerusalem, I didn't feel any glory. I felt the weight of too many steps on a land that had already absorbed too much blood. There was smoke over the hills. There were broken domes in the distance. There were children without the faces of children, because war robs childhood before it robs life. And then the sky opened, not as metaphor, not as poetry. It opened for real. A gigantic shadow swallowed the city at high noon. The sun became a sickly disk. The temperature dropped. Communications failed. Even the engines, for a moment, seemed to choke, as if the air had become heavier. I looked up and saw the impossible, immense geometric structures hovering effortlessly, as if the world were too small to support them. And it was there, in that second that didn't fit in my heart, that I saw men from both sides stop shooting. Human war has a rhythm of terrible logic. You learn the sound of a projectile, the distance of an explosion, the pattern of a drone. But that was silence in the form of presence. It was an authority that didn't need to ask for passage. Some fell to their knees. Others raised their weapons to the sky as if they could hurt the night. I stood still, unable to do anything but breathe. And in my head, a dirty thought grew like a weed. What if this is what we ask for unknowingly? What if our God is with us was heard by something else? The first ascent was clean. Beams of light touched the ground like fingers. They didn't burn. They didn't explode. They simply marked. Where they touched, the dust vibrated and the devices went crazy. Then the smaller ships appeared, and from them emerged forms that weren't monstrous in the way the movies promised. That disturbed me more. They had symmetry, they had posture, they had a kind of sobriety that reminded me of bureaucracy. The first attack wasn't carnage, it was a cut. The most advanced weapons from both sides failed like wet toys. Drones fell like stones. Targeting systems lost reference. Suddenly, our modern armies were crowds with pieces of metal in their hands. The whole city became a room where the light had been turned off and someone larger had locked the door. Then the aliens began to harvest. They didn't take everyone. They took enough for panic to turn into method. People disappeared in beams of light. Entire groups were removed silently, without a struggle, as if human will no longer held any weight. And, in the absence of explosions, the mind searches for explanations. Some shouted miracle, others demon. I couldn't call it anything. I could only think about how easy it was for them to move us. Then the improbable happened. Unity, it wasn't an embrace. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a survival calculation. An improvised ceasefire, born in the same place where the greatest truths are born. In fear, I saw Muslim fighters covering Christian civilians with their own bodies when the lights descended. I saw Christians sharing water with wounded people from the other side. I saw men who had spent years calling the other an enemy looking at each other and, for a moment, recognizing what had always been there, the same vulnerability. I don't romanticize this. I don't sanctify it. Unity was what happens when the species realizes that arguing about who is right is too small in the face of the abyss. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope if a greater enemy forced us to remember that we, or human, perhaps there was still salvation. Perhaps the intervention of the sky was, in fact, a test. and now we were answering it right. Perhaps God was pushing us to the only path possible, side by side. The following days were of desperate resistance. We learned quickly. We adapted old weapons. We went back to using wires, gunpowder, raw metal. We created ambushes in narrow streets because their technology seemed less comfortable in human improvisation. We discovered that they didn't like certain sound frequencies. We found, by accident, a type of material, fragments of their descents that interfered with the light, beams when heated. In the midst of all this, I kept doing what I knew, I witnessed. I buried the dead from all languages because the earth doesn't ask for the religion of those who are buried. I cared for the living who trembled because fear has the same color on any face. I prayed, but my prayers changed. At first I prayed for victory, then I prayed for understanding. Finally, I began to pray for only one thing, that God would not let us become what we hated. And then when the resistance seemed to finally crack, the aliens changed their strategy. They stopped attacking just like that the large ships remained in the sky like a ceiling. The descents became rare, punctual. The beams no longer harvested masses, they harvested specific individuals. The world, which had collapsed with violence, began to collapse with its absence. It was in this silence that true domination began. First, they released boxes that fell from the sky in strategic places. Starving cities, devastated zones, areas where water was mud. Inside were compacted food, purifiers, medicine, simple enough technology to not scare us, advanced enough to seem divine, all without demanding anything, at least not explicitly. I saw people cry while eating. I saw mothers thank the sky. I saw leaders from both sides hesitate because refusing help was signing the death of thousands. Accepting help was opening the temple doors to the unknown. We accepted, we called it a truce, we called it mercy, we called it opportunity. Then the aliens gave us something even more dangerous than food. Organization, a distribution network, safe routes, delivery points, and to avoid conflicts, they asked us to create mixed committees with representatives from both sides. For the first time, Christians and Muslims sat at the same table to decide how to share the bread. I remembered the moment. I thought it was beautiful. Today I know it was the moment that chains were forged. Because the boxes didn't just come with supplies, they came with tools, pulse devices to monitor health, tags to track distribution, cards to ensure justice. Small things, reasonable, almost human, and little by little, survival began to depend on them. Without the card, you didn't get purified water. Without the tag, you didn't enter the safe zone. Without the pulse device, the medical post wouldn't serve you because it needed a diagnosis. Everything had justification. Everything seemed civilized. Everything was an elegant version of a barrel pointed at your head. There were those who refused. Of course, there were rebels who destroyed delivery points. There were preachers who called it a mark. There were leaders who tried to warn. Bahanga is a cruel theology. When your child is dying, you don't discuss philosophy. You accept the bread. And with each acceptance, humanity was reorganizing. Not around God, not around Allah, not around flags. Around the alien distribution system. I began to notice the pattern too late. The aliens hadn't defeated us in strength. They had defeated us in need. And then came the most surprising step, the masterstroke I could never have imagined. Because it didn't seem like a stroke. It seemed like a gift. They announced not with words but with signs, symbols on screens, projections in the sky, the creation of the protection zones, regions where there would be no violence, where there would be energy, water, food, care. To enter, you just had to follow the protocol. Surrender weapons, accept monitoring, accept re-education. I saw old enemies walking together into the zones like pilgrims. I saw soldiers laying down rifles as one lays down sin. I saw entire families crossing illuminated gates with eyes full of hope. I also crossed, not because I trusted the aliens, but because I needed to follow my flock, and because, somewhere inside me, I still wanted to believe that God could use even the enemy to save his own. Inside the zones, life seemed possible. There was light. There was silence without fear. There were clean beds. There was neutral music, without language, without homeland. There were screens, teaching routines, hygiene, cooperation. Hatred seemed more distant, almost childish, and I, who had seen so much death, was tempted to call it a miracle. But miracles don't require bracelets. Miracles don't require rankings. Miracles don't require your behavior to be evaluated by an invisible system. Little by little, I began to notice the absences. People who were relocated and never returned. Children who disappeared from common areas and reappeared days later, silent, with the eyes of adults. Community leaders who were invited for consultations and returned docile, with the same speech, the same gestures, as if they had been aligned. And most importantly, I began to notice something in myself. I was calmer than I should be. I slept better than a man who had lived through war deserved to sleep. I felt less anger, less fear, less urgency at first. I was grateful. Then I grew suspicious. And then I noticed the device on my pulse vibrating at specific moments whenever I thought about escaping. Whenever I questioned too much, whenever I remembered the war with vivid details, it wasn't shock, it wasn't pain, it was adjustment. As if someone was lowering the volume of my soul, it was then that I understood. With a clarity that made me feel nauseous, the aliens hadn't come to destroy religions. They had come to make them unnecessary. Not out of atheism, but through replacement. They had united us against a threat. Yes, they had given us the feeling that we were better, that we learned, that we grew. They had allowed Christians and Muslims to see each other as brothers in suffering. And when brotherhood was born, they adopted it as a tool. It is united humanity is easier to manage. A reconciled humanity accepts protocols. A tired humanity calls a leash peace. And the final step of slavery was the quietest. They gave us purpose. The system began offering tasks, contributions, jobs in exchange for points, points in exchange for privileges, privileges in exchange for obedience. Each person began to have a profile-appropriate role, and the profile was measured by pulse, by screens, by behavioral traces. Those who worked more, with more docility, earned more comfort. Those who questioned lost access. Those who insisted disappeared. I saw old generals becoming distribution supervisors, proud to serve peace. I saw old imams and priests turning into moral guides of the protocol, teaching calm, resignation, harmony. I saw my own faith being pushed to a corner, soft and turned into therapy. And the worst, I saw happy people, not happy as winners, but happy as those who finally don't need to decide anything. Happy as those who exchange the weight of freedom for a clean bed. The final surprise came one morning when the sky was too clear. The large ships, which had remained as a ceiling, began to move. Not to leave, to reposition themselves, forming a design over Jerusalem, a vast, geometric symbol so perfect it hurt to look at. The screens and the zones displayed images of the planet as an organism, roots, flows, statistics, and I understood. They weren't occupying Earth as conquerors. They were transforming Earth into a station, a farm, not of flesh, as I had feared at first, of behavior, of work, of domesticated belief. We became labor to sustain the very system that protected us, and then, crowning this reality, the light beams returned, but now they no longer harvested people by force in battlefields. They harvested volunteers with high scores. People selected for performance, obedience, emotional stability. They were taken for missions outside the zones and never came back. Those who stayed said it was an honor, said it was a calling, said it was evolution. I, who had already seen too many promises turn into graves, understood what it was. Expat atits io we were not being saved. We were being prepared to serve elsewhere, on another scale, as pieces of an empire that feeds on tired civilizations. That night I took the device off my pulse with an improvised knife. Hidden, bleeding in silence so it wouldn't trigger alarms. I felt real pain for the first time in weeks, and it was almost a comfort. The pain returned me to myself, but when I looked around I realized I was a man loose in a clean cage, and the cage no longer needed visible bars because the world outside was no longer ours. What was left of humanity was being enslaved slowly, with consent, with gratitude, with relief. As if freedom were just an excess, the species had finally decided to amputate. I knelt in the dark and prayed as I hadn't prayed since the beginning of the war. I didn't ask for victory, I didn't ask for signs. I asked for the courage not to call peace what was domination. And when I raised my eyes, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The city of Jerusalem, in the distance, shining under the symbol in the sky like an altar, not of my faith, nor of the faith of the other side, but of a new religion without a name, whose God was the system and whose sacrament was obedience. It was there that the final truth crushed me with its perfect irony. We united to defeat the aliens, and it was exactly this union that made them invincible, because now, finally, there was only one flock, and I, a Christian narrator in a reorganized world, understood that the end would not be an explosion nor a judgment of fire. The end would be soft, the end would be comfortable, the end would be accepted.